again, welcome back. We're going to continue working on our React project, and we'll be loading some weather data, right? So that's our goal anyway. So far we've got the user interface working. We have the menu here. We can choose also with a radio button what unit the temperature should be displayed in. You can enter your zip code here, 95045. I don't know, I'm just making up zip codes, right? So you can type in any zip code there and it displays it. And then when you click this button, we're going to submit the zip code and load the weather. Okay, so let's get started here. So how is this going to work, right? What we're going to do is we're going to have a variable, a state variable that holds the weather data, right? But you can imagine that, like, when I load this, actually let's change the zip code to empty, right? So when I begin, the default state for my app is no weather data has loaded, right? So there's no data loaded here. So we have to wait till the data is loaded and then we can display it, right? There's also a situation where if we try to display the data but it doesn't exist, we get an error, okay? So we want to avoid that. So the concept here is conditional rendering. So conditional rendering means, under certain conditions, we're going to render something. That means display it on the screen. And under other conditions, we're not going to display it, or we're going to display some alternative, okay? So let's get started. I'm going to go to the top of my weather component here and create a new state variable. So I'm going to call this one data and set data. Okay, so there's my variable there, and the initial value for data could be null. Like null is a valid value. It means like no value, right? So data has not been set, right? So when the weather has been set, though, data is going to be an object with properties, and it'll be like properties will be things like temperature, description, airspeed, humidity, min temperature, max temperature, things like that, okay? All the features of the weather that people might be interested in, right? Okay, so what are we going to do? Like maybe, right now I'm showing the zip code up here at the top along with the unit, right? But maybe I want to show the temperature, like the weather data here, okay? So imagine that the weather data was supposed to look something like this, like it's like data equals an object with, temp of 72 degrees and description of, partly cloudy, something like that, right? Then, I could show it here maybe by doing this. I could say, data.temp, right? In this case, though, I'm going to have a problem. It's going to say null is not an object evaluating data.temp. So I said .temp, but data is null, right? And that makes sense. That's what we set it to, right? So, if I was to, set the default value to this object right here like this, then, it would show 72, right? So let's go back there, right? So you can see I've got temperature here, and then I can display it, but when I don't have any temperature, I'm going to get an error, right? So this is the first thing that we need to solve, right? So because when our app loads, this is going to be null, right? There's going to be nothing there. So what I want to do first is, before we display this information here, I want to ask a question. So I'm going to put the curly brackets here, and I'm going to say, hey, data, and then I can say, I'm going to put this h1 inside here, right? And what this says is that the double ampersand says that both sides of the ampersand, both sides of the expression, have to be true. So in JavaScript, we have this concept of truthy truthy and falsy, right? Right, so truthy values are, are things like true. Any value, like a string, a number, any value, right? So, and, any value, almost any value. Let's say almost any value, okay? Falsy values, on the other hand. So if you say falsy, it's false, 0, undefined, null. And there's a couple more. I actually don't have them all memorized. I forget if nan is on there. I think nan is actually a valid value. I think it's a truthy, but I can't remember. But anyway, this is what we need to know here, right? If we're falsy, if we're null, okay? So if this side is false, then the whole thing evaluates to false, right? And in that case, React is not going to display anything, okay? If this is true, then this is a value, right? But it's not true or false, but it's a value. It's an object or a function, and that actually is under the heading of almost any other value. Okay, so this would be true, and this would be true. And what happens in this case is it gives us the second item, right? So it evaluates to the second one here. Okay, if both are true or both are truthy. Okay. If the first one is falsy, then we don't even look at the second one, and JavaScript just moves on and we don't see anything, which is what's happening here, right? If I was to put, temp is, 72 right there, then you can see like the 72 shows up because data is an object that falls up under the almost any value. It's a truthy value, and then we get this second value. And so this evaluates to the second value, and that's what we get displayed here, okay? So, so now we've got some conditional rendering happening, right? So this is one way. There's a couple ways to do this, okay? So this is one of the ways. It's a pretty easy way to get about this. So if you have a large thing here to do to print as a component, like it was multiple lines, this might get awkward and we could use another method. But right now we can stick with this, okay? So we got that. Now let's figure out how are we going to load our data, okay? So we've got that set up, but now we need some way to set the data here, okay? So before we can actually load the data, we have to be able to know when someone clicks the submit button. So we have to know when the submit button is pressed, right? And we can do that by adding an onSubmit here, okay? And onSubmit is a handler. It'll be a function that is invoked when you submit the form, okay? And you'll submit the form when you hit enter in the box here, or if you click the button. And technically the button right here, if we give it, we should be giving it type submit, because that explicitly says that this button is a submit button, okay? I'm getting an error here because I gotta put a function inside here. So let's actually do that, right? Okay, great. So now if I click submit, this button right here, it's going to submit the form, or if I hit enter in the form, okay? So we're doing pretty good so far. There's one little hang up with this right now, okay? And this is kind of a subtle thing, but I want you to watch like really carefully here, okay? I'm going to choose the temperature. Notice like if I refresh the page, it shows 72 here, right? The input field is empty. None of the buttons are selected, and this says Celsius. So I'm going to set this to Fahrenheit. So this is selected and Fahrenheit is selected, and then I'll type in 95901. I don't know, maybe that's a zip code somewhere, right? And so that's the state here. Watch what happens when I hit the submit button, okay? It cleared everything, right? Watch again when I hit the submit button, but keep your eye on the top of the browser here, like in the address bar, okay? Did you see that little bar go across there? So what that bar is telling us is that when you click submit, the browser is refreshing this page. It's reloading this HTML document. Okay, and we have created a single page application where reloading the page like starts our whole application over again. It like kind of, erases everything that we've done. It loses all the input that we typed into the field here. It loses the unit that we chose. It resets the unit, right? Because it's refreshing the page. So we never want to refresh the page, okay? So this is an effect of forms in HTML. So generally, what happens with a form is that when you submit it, it wants to load a new document. And if you haven't specified what document to load, it reloads itself, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to prevent that behavior. So I'm going to put the event object here, and since I only have one variable, I'll remove the parentheses. And then inside the handler for submit, or for onSubmit, I'm going to say e.prevent default, and then the parentheses at the end. Okay, so by calling this, we're going to prevent the default behavior of the browser, right, which is, in this case, is to reload the page or load another document, right? So we're going to prevent that. We're going to do some other stuff here, but we're going to prevent this first, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to prevent our page from getting refreshed, right? So I'm going to refresh the page here, type a new zip code into the field, and then I'll choose a unit and I'll hit submit. And you'll see it is not, it's not clearing the thing there, and I don't see the bar loading, right? So it's still doing this, right? But we've prevented the default behavior. Okay, so now we're in a good place. So maybe we'll stop the video here because we're in a good spot to actually do a lot more work. So let's just say what we need to do. So what we need to do here is we need to load weather data, and then we need to set data, right? So we're going to set data here with new data, wherever that comes from, right? We don't know where that comes from yet, right? But we'll put that here. And then by setting data, that should cause the component to refresh. And then hopefully if we've loaded some data, then we will actually render the data here. And there'll be a step here where I think what we want to do is turn this thing into another component, right? And have just a component separate for displaying our weather data. Okay, so thanks for watching. And then in the next video, we're going to cover these two items, okay?